Is there such a thing as too much luck? Is there such a thing as too much fun? Messing around, wondering how it's taken so long. I'm really so strong. It's not too much at all.
Welcome to Too Much with Denise Love Hewitt. I am feeling very excited and privileged today to be speaking with Dr. Dacher Keltner. I'm a longtime fan of his books and his work, and I think leading the way. I'll learn a lot from Dr. Keltner here. I'm going to read you a little bit about him, and then we're going to begin. Dr. Keltner is one of the world's foremost emotion scientists. He is a professor of psychology at UC Berkeley and of the Greater Good Science Center. He has over 200 scientific publications and 6 books, including Born to be Good, The Compassion Instinct, and The Power Paradox. He has written for many popular outlets, from the New York Times to Slate. He was also the scientific advisor behind Pixar's Inside Out, our favorite film, and is involved with the education of healthcare providers and judges, and has consulted extensively for Google, Apple, and Pinterest on issues related to emotion and well-being. In a world that tells us to be less, Dacher Keltner reminds us what it means to feel more and to lead with it. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Denise. I like your phrase of being more.
That's what we're all about these days. Let's not
Yeah,
let people live the full experience of who they are and eradicate the shame around that.
yeah, I hear you.
So we're living in very unprecedented, interesting times. And I think you were very prescient in a lot of your work that can inform how we respond today. And so I don't want to tell people, why don't you, in your words, explain to us what the power paradox is?
Yeah, thank you. In this time, I think that we really have to deeply consider what power is, what's happening right now in these authoritarian times, and then how do we respond, like you said. You know, I grew up in kind of a hippie context in the late 60s and shaped by feminist thought and, you know, all the revolutions of those times. And as a young social scientist, I've been studying human behavior for 33 years now, 35 years since grad school. I kind of wish that we lived in a world that didn't have power dynamics. And that was one of the most wrong-headed ideas I've ever had. I mean, power, your capacity to influence others, is everywhere. It is from the first moments of life when a developing fetus is struggling for resources in the womb, to sexual dynamics, politics, you name it. You've been witness to all kinds of power in your own life, Denise. And so 30 years ago, I started to study power. You know, I didn't want to, but it just seemed to be everywhere. And I bumped into what I think are two pretty solid laws of human society and social dynamics. And they add up to the power paradox. The first is, and this may surprise people, we gain power and influence by inspiring a lot of people. If you're on the campaign trail, if you move people with your rhetoric and your ideas, you will get more votes. You'll have power. If you are an artist and you put something up that stirs a lot of conversation, you will have more power. If you're a woman rising in the ranks and you handle all the sexism in a way that gives you a strong social network, you'll have power. Power is based in your ability to be socially intelligent and to bring people together. And then, you know, I started to find, and this is just ironclad, that if you have power and privilege and wealth and a status in society that gives you power, authority, you will violate the laws of social intelligence with regularity. You become less socially intelligent. And our studies over the years and others like Adam Galinsky, it's embarrassing, you know, less empathetic, more racist, more sexist. You behave sexually inappropriately. You take more resources. A couple findings from our lab that really struck a chord culturally. You know, we brought students to the lab. These are college students, randomly assigned somebody to power out of 3. And in the middle of their experiment, we put out a plate of chocolate chip cookies. And the powerful person took more of the cookies and ate with their lips smacking and cookie crumbs flying all over. They're like, ah, And then our famous car study, like you put a pedestrian at the edge of a pedestrian zone in California, and you just look at, and it's law, you're supposed to stop. And indeed, it's the drivers of the powerful BMWs who blaze through the pedestrian zone. So power corrupts. So it's this paradox of life. Like, I rise in power by really bringing people together and animating effective action. And then once I feel powerful, it takes away those qualities.
It is really wild. As many people listening to this podcast know, I've worked with a lot of celebrities. I've worked with a lot of billionaires. I've been around a lot of the things that we quote unquote value in this culture, money, power, and fame. And I realized beyond just what we're talking about here, which is that power corrupts, these people also aren't very happy.
Yeah.
And so I have to believe, this is what I've come to, and I think you probably have more insight on this, is that it affects our brain in a very specific way. Like, I really think it's like a drug that people, when they get too much of it, if you are not really grounded in your inner work and have done that work before you reach a certain height, you inevitably will just, like, something messes with your brain and you become something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, your question, I'm embarrassed to say, just gave me goosebumps, because not many people have asked that question of the neuroscience of the abuse of power, and then what it does to our lives, including those people who have everything you think you would want of money, fame, wealth, etc. Power. Yeah, just one of the areas of concentration in this research is on empathy and connecting to other people. That involves particular regions of your brain, like the medial prefrontal cortex, right here in your cortex. It involves, our lab has shown the vagus nerve, this big bundle of nerves wandering through your body that helps you be open to people and be interested in them and connect. Power and privilege quiet down the activation of that part of your prefrontal cortex and your vagus nerve. That's alarming, right? That just a little sense of power, and suddenly the regions of my brain that help me sync up with other people, the regions of my body that help me care, are diminished.
Wow.
And then to your observation, Denise, connection, caring, empathy are some of the strongest pathways to happiness. I mean, literally, good connections, 10 years of life expectancy boost, power diminishes that. And that's why when you look at the happiness literature more generally, power and wealth don't correlate that well with happiness. You get a little boost in happiness by having a ton of money, but not like you would expect. And I think it's because it diminishes the wonders of social connection.
So say that I'm someone and I'm rising to a certain level of fame or power. What can I do to check myself so I don't fall prey to the paradox?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, people really grapple with this in organizations, right? And I've taught in organizations for a long time and been around really powerful people like you. I think that there are a lot of very practical things to do. John F. Kennedy, after the Bay of Pigs fiasco in his presidency, turned to his brother, RFK, and he said, you have to be the devil's advocate. You have to always critique anything I say, right? And so strong social systems have that built into it. If I'm a powerful person and I want to advocate for this new line of streaming or whatever the case may be, you got to have smart people around who are like, here are the problems with that. Because we often mute ourselves around powerful people. You got to build in accountability. And it's just strong organizations 101. Like, powerful people have to explain themselves. They have to provide rationales. That's important. I think it's really important, what I often worry now about American society, because we know when people are aware of their reputations, right, of being critiqued in the media or being, critiqued and scrutinized for the decision-making processes and what they do, they become more ethical. And I worry, man, gutting the legacy media, which part of their job is to critique the powerful. The powerful people today they're just less scrutinized. And so we can do a lot to really have ethical power. History proves this to be true, but they're under assault right now.
You said something I agree with wholeheartedly, which is so many powerful people I know have built a system and designed a system in which they surround themselves by yes people. And when you
Yeah.
stand up against their status quo, you
Yep.
are punished or fired. And I've been in that exact environment.
Wow.
And we have to learn to be more open to unconventional feedback. I feel this a lot in corporate culture as well. There's a lack of innovation, there's a lot of groupthink because we don't allow the space for diversity of thought. And what you're talking about with people feeling like we're not scrutinizing people enough, there's this huge movement around cancel culture. Everyone's so afraid of cancel culture. You can't be as free in a nightclub because people have phones out, and if you're famous, you're going to be caught doing something uncouth. Your career is going to be over. And I'm of the mindset that actually cancel culture is not a bad thing. What we need is accountability culture. I'm a big
Yeah.
fan of
Nice.
redemption. I don't believe, I like you, I do a lot of restorative justice work. I volunteer in prisons, and I don't believe the worst things that we do define us. We will need to create more of a redemptive culture. And so cancel culture becomes less scary if you know how to hold yourself accountable.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you first of all, thank you for your work in prisons, Denise. Seriously, I just saw a friend of mine who was in San Quentin and is now out and teaching meditation, Mo Washington, Darnell Washington in LA to
Oh,
people. Yeah, amazing. Yeah, it's interesting. I agree. I think we probably because of the Abrahamic traditions and the ideas of original sin and like there's this just deep corruptness to human nature that we do have this culture of one moral flaw or one moral mistake defines your entire character. That's just not true, right? But that seems to be very true here in the United States. And as a result, we have this kind of cancel culture of like, if I can show you doing one inappropriate thing, then your effect in the world is diminished and unjustified. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. And in fact, the idea, first of all, in redemption, and thank you for using that word, we do need to remember that in the complexity of human relations, we make huge mistakes. And I always like saying, some of my favorite people have punched other people, who just in the heat of athletics, for example, and they redeem themselves. So I believe in that. But the key point that I think we need to be thinking about, we don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater with cancel culture, which is going to fade, right? Perhaps rightly so, because we are more effective and contribute more and do better work when we feel scrutinized and critiqued. You think about the jury process of everybody being allowed to speak their free mind and arrive at a good decision. You think about peer review in science, which is every paper I try to publish, I get 10 pages of critique, right? And it just makes me sharper.
yeah.
And we need that spirit, especially towards our powerful people when you think about what's happening right
Yeah.
now. We are in real jeopardy of shifts. So I think your philosophical position here, Denise, has this deeper alternative to our current culture of don't condemn people, let them make amends. We do our best work making amends, right? And make sure we're critical of each other with humility at play.
Well, I was originally a big supporter, champion of cancel culture. And the more
Yeah.
that I thought about it, the more, I've met probably almost every single person that you can think of. And I got to a point where I was like,
Is that right?
yeah, I got to a point where it's just like never meet anyone because they're all human. Like no one is going to
Yeah.
defy our expectation based on the lore that they purport or create in the world. We're
Yeah.
all humans, we're all flawed. And I think
Yeah.
starting there, I was like, there's not some perfect person who's never making mistakes or is always nice or or it's just like maybe they're having a bad day when you meet X famous person and you're like, they were so mean to me. No, they're just tired, they had a bad day. Creating that space for us to just hold people as they are versus they have to be this perfect person is actually really helpful because then we're allowed to iterate and be flawed and yes, be held accountable, but not in a way that we think our life is over.
Yeah. Yeah. And Leanne Tambrinke, who was a student in my lab, has done work when leaders apologize for mistakes leading companies. the community, the organization trusts them more, they work harder, the company rebounds, right? Throughout history, we often do our best work after moral transgressions. I love the finding of Dan McAdams he studies how people tell the stories of their lives, how they arrive at a sense of coherence, of identity, and contribution to the world. And very often it's fueled by making mistakes and then redeeming ourselves, right? And then you look at the current political moment of not taking accountability for wrongly delivered people to Salvadorian prisons, not taking accountability for letting journalists in on top secret discussions of,
Yeah.
of our armed services. That's how we improve. That's where social progress arises. Leaders often think, declare no wrong, say you haven't done anything wrong. And I think that's a profound mistake.
It's a profound mistake. But what you say in the power paradox is that it's actually not human nature to abuse power. And that
Yeah.
when people are
Yep.
resorting to coercive force, it's when their power is actually slipping. And
Yeah.
I'm with you. Force is an unsustainable strategy. Can you expand that for us a little bit in terms of what the world we're living in and how we can understand that in a deeper way?
Yeah, I think that and I always look at things evolutionarily, Denise, as you know, and so, we evolved for a couple 100,000 years where power structures were pretty horizontal and not vertical, with individuals dominating other individuals. And there was really, you could look at human societies as a balance, that forces were balanced. That, yeah, there were people who had higher status, but they were balanced by the opinions of other people. And that kept their behavior ethical, which is what we've talked about thus far. And then what can happen in societies is you can start to shift towards efforts at asymmetrical force, right? That having military superiority, I can go invade Vietnam and win. Oops, that didn't work out so well. Having political superiority with resources, I can go in and dictate the outcome of an election. And on balance, these efforts at asymmetrical force have really a mixed, at best, record, right? Historically, asymmetrical forces trying to produce social change, right? Broad social change, rather than more collaborative dynamics, tend to fail, right? When you look at social movements, moral movements, political movements. If you look at individuals who practice asymmetric force in organizations, right, in the workplace, they tend to fail. If you go in and you try to manipulate people and undermine people and shut them down or diminish their creativity, a more Machiavellian strategy, those strategies they get a lot of attention. A lot of people are talking about you, but they tend to undermine the organization. So yeah, I think that I know you've always championed the idea of what are the healthy blueprints of human society? And this idea of power is asymmetrical force, which comes out of Machiavelli, fails in most contexts today. Even in presidential historical analyses of presidencies, and a lot of that's on our minds right now with a Machiavellian administration, so-called leading the way, they tend to fail too. They tend to have fairly short-lived effects and not the long-term legacies that people should care about when they occupy the office of presidency. I think it's one of the great subtle lessons of the last 50, 100 years is that power has moved out of asymmetric force to more dynamic, bi-directional negotiations of how we change the world.
This is the piece that gives me a tiny bit of hope, is that this is an unsustainable strategy. The issue is the harm it's going to cause in the interim, and it's going to hurt a lot of people. And that is the visceral part for me that I feel the weight of on a daily basis. And a lot of people feel incredibly powerless right now. They don't know how to use their personal agency to show up for the world or the rights that they want to keep and preserve. And the world that we live in preys upon dysregulation and constant stimulation and false information. So how can people who don't feel very powerful right now start to recognize how powerful they actually are.
Yeah, man, you're giving me, I got more goosebumps at
Oh,
your question.
good.
You know, um, yeah, this is a deeply cynical time. Cynicism being this philosophy that Jamil Zaki at Stanford has written about of humans at best are just selfish and greedy and want to manipulate and undermine others, which isn't true at all. The neuroscience is clear on that and other kinds of evidence. And it's a cynical time because you just look at what's being gutted right now. Science, cancer research. We're making enormous progress. Oops, that's gutted. Racism. We have made incredible progress reducing racism and the costs of being the target of sexist or racist thought, which used to hurt health. We're making progress. The justice system. We have seen declines in crime and youth crime and the like that are now being undermined by the attack on the very justice system. And what I really take heart in, Denise, is not only conversations like this, which are too strong and too pervasive, and then the second thing is just a remarkable empirical science on how individual actions really matter. Individual actions matter in climate change. Social programs in cities that are just casual, like, hey, let's help them play basketball, let's fix the lights, or let's get together for a meditation group. Those reduce crime in youths. That's well documented by Sharkey at Princeton. There's a very deep, what we call a meta-analysis in science, which is bring all the studies together of all the systematic efforts to increase biodiversity in the world through rewilding cities and planting gardens and afforestation. Upwards of 55% of California are green spaces. Those increase biodiversity. They capture carbon, right? So individual actions independent of the asymmetric force that we see today work. And we just got to keep doing them, and we got to not lose hope. And remember your work in prisons, right? And I've been part of that too. And thank you for surfacing that. That works, right? We're getting more people out of prison. They're doing better as they get out. So yeah, you got to trust your gut. You can't believe the illusions of asymmetric force. And we got to stay active.
Everyone has a different role to play. And that's
Yeah.
what I always try and help people understand is that if your gift is storytelling, then storytelling.
Yep.
If you love protesting, protest. If you love writing, write. If you love volunteering locally, do that. And everything is as important as the other action because it takes all kinds of people to make the world work. But I think we forget that when we're sitting in a time where it feels like every little action doesn't add up to anything. But it does. I mean, even with the 5 million plus people who came out for hands off, I think
Yeah.
flash forward to June when we feel the tariffs, we're going to see double or triple that amount of people take to the street.
Oh, yeah.
All that stuff
Yeah.
incrementally will build.
Yeah. It is. And, I thank you. And thank you for raising these issues. I really admire Timothy Snyder, who's written about dictatorship and fascism at Yale University. Kind of a sensation right now. And he's like, the amount of resistance right now and the amount of people who are engaging in the inquiry you're inviting us to engage in, Denise, of like, what do I care about? I live in rural California or South Dakota or New York City. What should I do? Well, I'm really inspired by rewilding playgrounds in cities. I'll go do that.
Yeah.
I'm really inspired by working in prisons. Find the place you can do that. That is growing, and we gotta do that inquiry, find the space, and there's a lot of really inspiring social science on what social movements change the world, and I think they're forming right now for the better of our culture.
Well, I have a question for you actually, because I've been looking at synthesizing the population of America. You have predominantly like women and people of color. My mom's from the Caribbean. I'm a daughter of an immigrant, even though I'm a white woman.
Right on.
And so I look at the story I was told about America as a kid, which is a story that we weren't necessarily living it in practice, I was told that this was a melting pot. This is a place where all cultures
Yeah.
were accepted and immigration was a key part of how we were built. So it's really antithetical and bizarre to be living at a time where we're getting a different narrative. And yes, I know that this country was built upon white supremacy, but enough people in practice have swallowed a different story. And so
Yeah.
from a storytelling perspective, it feels like two narratives that are in contrast with each other. And I think when there's that amount of contrast, it like unsustainable force, it can't work because it just doesn't resonate with the majority of people's experience of what this country is.
Yeah. Yeah. You're. I wish. I wish everybody was asking the questions you're asking. They're really deep, Denise. And I think, and social scientists have been noting this from David Myers, The American Paradox, I think about 2000. Nicholas Kristof has written about this for the New York Times. The American narrative of the post-World War II was woman at home, man's at the company, you play softball, you go to church. And that really was transformed in the 60s and 70s as women entered the workforce and economics changed and the like. And then the big one, which is the increasing diversification of our culture, where I don't know what the latest projections are, but European American individuals will be in the minority pretty soon.
2050, I believe.
2050, California.
Than white people.
Yeah, California, it's already happened.
Mm-hmm.
And we've moved away from church and we've moved away from typical gender relations. And women are now rising in power prolifically, more so than in the last 15,000 years. It's remarkable. So we need a new narrative. And I think that this is interesting that what's surfaced largely through online ugliness is white supremacy. Oh yeah, that is true. It's built into the Abrahamic traditions, et cetera, and it fueled colonialism and slavery. That's there. But there's this other narrative that people like you are like, hey, let's tell that story. And it is about diversity, certain kinds of freedom. And we're struggling to find that narrative. And it's going to be the challenge of our times in some sense. And we'll be led by people like you. So what would you say that narrative is? Tell me, pitch me in the elevator. Here's the news story of the United States.
The news story, I think I'm very counterculture. Social media has created such a level of dysregulation and overstimulation that we are losing the capacity to connect and be present. Which is the same thing that's suffering in heterosexual dynamics, is that there's this increasing male loneliness and there's less third spaces, and the economy's adding factors that people can't afford to be together as they used to be. And so this is going to lead us to awe, but I'm all about the slowing down. Like the slowing down of culture to bring us back to a place where humanity is clear. Because when we're living behind screens, it's really easy to be hateful. It's really easy to feel empowered and hate women. When you're in front of a woman, is it that easy to tell her that you don't think she has the same rights as you? It's a very different experience.
Yeah. You and I should have more conversations. And I'm taking notes, by the way. So thank you for your wisdom, Denise. I just reviewed the literature on online life. I wouldn't even call it life.
Yeah, fair.
And so, and the reason you're moving me to deep ideas is because you have such good ideas, and you've got a tie-dye t-shirt on, which reminds me of my childhood, and so you've got a lot of power going. But that's not what online life is like for the most part. It's astonishing what we've done. 6 to 8 hours a day, 40% of therapy is online, people are dating online, we pray online, we do yoga by ourselves online, we watch streaming shows online. It's unlike any technological experiment in human history. And it has changed our minds and our memories and our feelings. And one of the things that is surfacing in reviews more recently, finally figuring out how to analyze these big patterns of data by people like Jay Van Bevel, online hate and ugliness is probably 5 to 10 times more common online than when you're with another human being face to face. You are misogynistic and racist and you stereotype, well documented. More subtle is online. If I'm, in a Zoom meeting at work, I'm looking at a little digital image of my work colleague who's telling us what should happen. And we know from neuroscience that impoverished digital image lacks the richness of, seeing the depth of a human being, literally. And it just doesn't activate the brains. It's like a big void experiment. So this is a big mistake. And I am with you. Awe, direct experience, being physically present. When having taught happiness for 30 years, people are like, how do I find happiness? It's like, put away your phones, slow down, pause, and get outside or go have a beer with a friend or hug someone or dance. And I think and I love your phrasing of the counterculture, because lo and behold, that will be the counterculture, right?
Yeah.
Which is, as the tech people say, get offline. Such an absurd phrase, right? It's like offline. No, be alive.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. No. That's just life. This is a weird. It's
yeah.
the
I'm offline now. It's like, what? No, you're living, and the rest of the stuff is a pale imitation. Yeah, and I think that's coming, and I think it's going to be exciting to see.
And to make something clear, I was fully someone who did not slow down for the first third of my life. I was moving 100 miles per hour, and I had a big career heartbreak and failure that had made me reassess how I wanted to live and work in the world. And now that I've slowed down and made walking an essential part of my life, as I've just taken slow mornings or my luxury of luxuries, all that stuff, I feel so much more satiated. I don't need to rush anymore. I have less to prove. There's a level of emotional well-being that when you're rushing that much, you're not present in your own life. You're wasting this one thing we have, this joy that we have to be here and be together, and rushing, you're missing it. And big tech, which is growth at all costs, productivity, it has not aged well. And most of my friends, because I was a tech founder, that were tech founders, have also come to this realization after building big companies that blink, I missed half my life.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd love to hear some more of your wisdom on slowing down, and because you've been right at the heart of kind of the digital revolution. But I'll give you a finding that astonishes me that we've replicated, and we've done this with the hardest working people I know. In the context of the COVID pandemic, I was asked to consult a lot or be present with medical doctors and people running hospitals. And it was hell, 1 million people died. A lot of people died without their family around. It was, and when I started to interview the doctors, it was just like, they were traumatized. 30% drop in staff because they didn't want to be vaccinated, et cetera. Well known. And we know that doctors at that time, and actually more generally, and nurses and physicians' assistants and administrators are more vulnerable to anxiety and depression because healthcare is hard these days. And so we ask them to pause, put away everything, and take a moment, 1 minute, to think about what's awe-inspiring, what makes them feel like things are vast and wonderful and inspiring. And right now, I'm thinking about several things you've said, Denise, that inspired me. Like, wow, that's cool. I look at your T-shirt. I'm like, I'm thinking of my T-shirt when I was 9 years old, and I feel awe, right? So we did that with medical doctors. They found a minute of awe a day for 21 days, and it reduced depression and anxiety, which is hard to move around. We're about to publish a paper showing the same 1 minute of awe paradigm reduces symptoms of long COVID in patients. Long COVID is tough, total exhaustion, heart rate fluctuations, et cetera, and just finding awe for a minute. We don't need to get off phones. We don't need to burn down Meta, but we just need to kind of recalibrate and find those moments you're talking about.
I was with my friend this weekend who's a big consumer packaged goods founder, and we were hanging out. I was telling her about your work, and she was like, "Oh, I have to
Thank
read
you.
about the science of awe." She's like, "I just don't feel all that much." And I said, "What do you mean?" I feel it all the time. I'm also like, I've been a professional DJ for 15 years, so I also feel like I have a little bit more access to that flow state and group organism dynamic more regularly than most people. But while I was with her at her house, all of a sudden her dog goes to eat. Her dog just starts like jumping up in the air to eat. And I stop and I go, "What is happening?" And she was like, "What do you mean? This is just how Madison eats every day." And I said, "This is awe. This is unbelievable." I'm like, it's right here at all times, right in front of you. And this is also something I've had to work every day to capture. One of my other mentors, last year was a hard year for me, and gratitude felt a little far away. It was hard for me last year to find, despite writing my little lists, I felt a little apathetic about life. And one of my mentors told me, "Denise, this is how you find it." I said, "How do I find it?" Just go outside and look up and say, "The sun is shining today. There's some birds chirping. Oh, are there more birds today than yesterday? Are the birds doing a symphony just for me?" She told me this in January. And then I read your book about awe, and you had almost the same few sentences in the book. And
Look up to the sky.
it was like the birds are doing a concert just for me. And I was like, this is awe. It was the same repeated message to me, which I was like, the universe is talking to me very loudly. But it's that simple, which is just stopping for a second, and then you can capture the feeling.
Yeah. Thank you for your wonderful examples. Getting a lot of goosebumps in our conversation, Denise, so which is a sign of awe, by the way. Yeah. Just to, Albert Einstein, one of the most basic human emotion is mystery or awe. And I think that it is a basic state of consciousness. And so what that means is it's always just like threat and fear and love and compassion, basic states of the mind, taking place down in the older regions of the brain. So it means we can access it at almost any context. Wow. And it blew me away. Like you, I've volunteered a lot in prisons. I was giving a talk in San Quentin in front of 180 men in blue, as they're called, prisoners. Many are now out, still friends with them. I was like, "What gives you awe?" I asked them. And their list, and I listed in the book, it was the best list I've ever encountered. Like, hugging my granddaughter, learning how to, getting my high school diploma, studying law, the light on the bay near San Quentin prison. I was just like, man, if you can find it coming out of solitary confinement or in prison, you can find it anywhere. And I think most people feel that way, that it's always right there and in need of being accessed.
What happens to our brain and thus our soul when we access awe more regularly?
There are a whole suite of physiological processes. I like to call them kind of the regions of the nervous system that promote selflessness or no self in Buddhism, orientation to others, agape, love of fellow human beings and all living forms in the indigenous traditions, as described by people like Dr. Urias Salidwin. And that's grounded in the brain and the body. So, tremendous science in Holland and Japan and throughout the United States and other cultures finds when I feel awe, looking at nature, thinking about the moral beauty of somebody, inspiring ideas like you've given me here, the default mode network of the brain is deactivated. That's really the region of the brain that's that nagging, shame-inducing voice of the self. That quiets down. You're no longer hearing like, "Oh, you said something wrong." You're just not so self-referential. What's activated, also deactivated, is the amygdala, seeing threat out in the world. What is activated is oxytocin release, one of my favorite chemicals produced in the hypothalamus down in the middle of your brain. Oxytocin helps you feel connected to other people, makes you open to things in the world. The vagus nerve is activated. That's Amy Gordon from our lab. That big bundle of nerves starting in your throat, spinal cord, goes through your heart, your lungs, your digestive organs, just makes you open up, right? And then tearing and goosebumps are fascinating. They're this little physiological process in your neck and in the back of your arms that are little muscle contractions around hair follicles that our social mammal relatives show, like monkeys, show when they're kind of leaning in and forming community with others. So it's just this amazing process of opening up to other people and the world. And by the way, is the exact opposite physiologically of fight or flight. So all the perils of fight or flight
Wow.
are diminished by awe, which is good news.
I love that it's just the quickest gateway to experiencing something larger than yourself.
Yeah.
That it's so simple to just all of a sudden feel interconnected with everything around you. And it's so easy to access.
Yeah. Jane Goodall saw awe in her chimpanzees, and she said, why wouldn't they feel feelings of awe or spirituality, which is really being amazed at things outside of yourself? And in some sense, that's the crisis of our times. Is I just looked at a paper, 24% of the things we post on Instagram are photos of the self.
Mm-hmm.
Another 24% or 25% are myself with someone else. So it's all this self-referentiality. And awe breaks us free of that. And there's so many wonders to behold that awe points us in the direction of.
You did a study that you mentioned in the book where people took photos of themselves outside. Will you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this one was really important, and it's Virginia Sturm who led it, and I was just a merry prankster companion, and gratefully so. Yeah, she had people who are 75 years old or older, which is an age when anxiety and depression rises.
Mm.
And anyone who's listening who has older parents sees that, as I do. Like, whoa, my parents are a little bit more depressed and anxious because their friends are dying, their bodies are fading, they're soon to die. That's part of life. Virginia Sturm had people at that age either go on a really vigorous walk for 15 minutes once a week or an awe walk. And in the awe walk, they do exactly what you have described here, Denise, which is pause, get outside, walk somewhere unusual, and just behold what's wonderful. That's all you have to do. And as they did that, they took photos of themselves, selfies, sent them to the scientists, and then we gathered data on them. And what we find is awe increases over time. That's really important, right? We give them instructions, go find awe. They do it 8 times, 8 weeks, but they feel more awe with each week. So as we practice awe, it gets deeper. And then they felt less physical pain in their bodies. And their photos, to your question, this is so funny. In the regular control condition, the photo's right in the center, it's big, the face. In the awe condition, you're starting to think about the whole context you're in, and the face starts to drift off to the side and get really small. So I'm like this. Yeah, because you're aware of the whole thing, the whole context around you. So really important study. We get better at awe with practice.
And also an awe walk is for all ages. We can all start employing that practice now. And I love that you talk about new stimuli, because I find for me, new stimuli is very important in walking for me to find more enjoyment. So even if it's the same walk I normally do, but with a different level of attention, is helpful. But it's like, you don't have to go far to do that. You just shake it up. Just go 10 minutes down the road somewhere else. I live in LA, so like new spots where I can just shake up my brain a bit instead of just doing the same thing all the time.
We talk about how the digital life that we now lead has captured our attention, and the awe science frees it up. And there are just all these simple things to do that are good for us, like looking at the sky, listening to water, listening to bird song, looking at the sunset, looking around you for human creation. This is my daughter Seraphina's mug she made for me. That is one of my most sacred objects. So yeah, there's awe all around us. Our research finds people feel it 2 to 3 times a week, and you can find it really easily. You don't have to drop everything and sell everything and put on white clothes and join a cult. It's all around us.
What I thought was really interesting was that you said the individual self was 20 times more likely to be a driver of awe in the US than other cultures.
Yeah.
And that you also say that we can more easily access awe with less wealth.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more
Yeah.
about that. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. I think we're in a crisis of individualism in the United States, the most individualistic culture in the world. We believe we're separate from others. We believe that profit is what brings happiness. We believe that we rise in the ranks thanks to genius and individual talent. And these are long-standing beliefs that are part of the American individualistic ideology. And I think that they've failed. I think they've run their course. We've had a lot of great successes, individual rights, freedoms, et cetera. But now in the United States, we're more lonely, we're more disconnected, we're more lonely males, you referred to, we're more materialistic than we should be. And as a result, awe has been infused with American individualism in the United States. When we looked at what makes people feel awe in the United States, they about 10% of the time they said themselves, you know. And it was like, I won this award, or man, have you seen my latest Tinder profile? It is awesome, you know. And it's like, well, that's a fast track to meaninglessness. So yeah, so I think we need to, your generation with its tie-dye shirts and its hands-off protests is gonna, and it's moving away from digital life, is gonna be like, no, we can take the best of individualism
Yes.
and then build back the community that we've lost as the result of it.
I'm very distraught, obviously, by the state of our politics. But
Yeah,
as this was happening, I said, well, maybe this is what we deserve. Because when you prop
yeah,
up money, greed, and the self as the most important values in a country, then this is the president you get.
yeah,
Because we are not living values of connectivity, of taking care of each other, of
yeah,
compassion. And so why do we think that that's who's going to lead our country? We have to embody those
yeah.
values here and then instill leaders who value the same things.
Yeah, and I think that's the next story, of America that we'll get to, of diversity plus freedom, plus the right kind of markets, plus how do we rebuild community? What are the new forms of spirituality that unite people? 30 million people practice yoga, you know. How do we make that a community enhancing force? How do we protect our institutions? I do work with the national parks, 360 million visits to the national parks each year. It's the single most American experience. And so we gotta sharpen this communal focus in light of the politics of today.
Well, my friend who's a comedy writer said that if he comes for the parks, she was like, that's when all the white women will show up. They're not going to let those parks go down. And I said, you know what? You might be right. That might be the universalizing component of our national parks. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been such a treat for me as a long time reader of your work. And it's informed so much of how I see the world and want to see the world. And so I appreciate you doing the level that I cannot. I am not a social scientist or psychologist, but in another life, I truly aspire to be.
Oh, well, thinking about power and awe and community for all these years, I'm lucky to be around young people like you, Denise, and I have good faith, that led by people of diverse backgrounds, women and men, we're going to make progress. It's part of our DNA, and so keep fighting and keep asking the good questions. And I appreciate the depth of your questions and their timeliness.
Oh, thank you. You are the perfect person to talk to right now. I think people really need this conversation and to understand that awe is the antidote, and that the power that's happening now is not something that is sustainable.
Yeah, and now we got to sort of talk about what our new story is going to be. So thanks for leading that way.
Thank you so much for listening. If you do like listening, it would mean the world to us if you could subscribe or review the podcast anywhere that you watch or listen to the podcast. It really helps with the algorithm to share this with the world. I want to give a special thank you to young Spielberg and Sarah Yarkin for their beautiful work on our opening jingle, Dana Boulos for her help with the beautiful art, and to all of you for tuning in and keeping this dream alive. If you want to hear certain topics or from certain guests, please feel free to email us. We really, really want to hear from you and see how we can best support you. See you next time.